When you press play on an episode of Code Your English, I want you to feel as if you're stepping into a quiet, thoughtful space. A place where you can breathe, slow down for a moment, and reconnect with the part of yourself that you sometimes forget to listen to. So welcome, I'm glad you're here. Today we're exploring a theme that is both personal and universal. Don't waste another year. And just to be clear, this isn't a dramatic warning or a guilt-fueled message. It's a gentle invitation to look closely at how we live, how we grow, and how easily we allow precious time to slip through our fingers without even noticing. When we talk about wasting a year, we often imagine something obvious. A major failure, a big mistake, or a year of doing absolutely nothing. But in reality, time is rarely wasted in such dramatic ways. More often, a year is lost quietly, almost invisibly, through delays, hesitation, and the small unexamined habits that slowly shape our days. We postpone decisions that matter. We silence our inner voice because it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. We follow old cognitive patterns that feel familiar even when they no longer serve us. And sometimes, without meaning to, we drift through months on autopilot, telling ourselves, I'll start soon, maybe next week, maybe next month. That's how a whole year can disappear. Not through a single choice, but through a collection of tiny, unnoticed moments. So, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Not as a challenge, but as an act of reflection. What did last year teach you about who you are becoming? Not just what you achieved or failed to achieve, but what you discovered about your strengths, your fears, your resilience, and your emotional patterns. What changed in you? And just as importantly, what didn't? This question isn't meant to create pressure. It's meant to open a doorway to self-awareness, so you can begin this year with clarity instead of confusion. As we move through this episode, think of it as a quiet conversation between you and yourself, guided, of course, by my voice, but centered on your inner truth. My goal is to make this journey both introspective and practical, emotionally honest, but also grounded in real-world choices. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin exploring what it truly means to not waste another year, and how you can shape the next 12 months with intention, courage, and a deeper sense of who you want to be. The hidden cost of waiting. When we think about change, we often tell ourselves that we're simply waiting for the right moment, the perfect timing, the ideal circumstances, the magical day when everything finally aligns. And on the surface, it sounds reasonable. After all, who doesn't want to start something new when they feel prepared and confident? But here's the quiet truth many of us don't notice. Waiting for the right time can slowly turn into a psychological habit, a kind of emotional default mode that feels safe, but silently holds us back. It becomes easy to postpone action because postponing doesn't require courage. It only requires comfort. And comfort, when repeated long enough, becomes a cage that looks harmless on the outside but limits us from within. So much of this habit is shaped by limiting beliefs. Those internal stories we repeat without even questioning them. Maybe you've told yourself, I'm not ready, or I need more experience, or what if I fail? These thoughts feel protective, as if they're keeping you away from embarrassment or disappointment. But in reality, they create emotional inertia, a kind of internal heaviness that makes even small steps feel overwhelming. The mind becomes so focused on potential problems that it forgets its own ability to learn, adapt, and grow. Fear-driven decision-making becomes the quiet driver of our daily choices, even when we're not consciously aware of it. If you think about it, you might realize how many areas of life are influenced by this silent waiting. Maybe it's staying in a job that no longer inspires you, not because you believe it's your long-term path, but because searching for something better feels uncertain. Maybe it's avoiding a necessary conversation with someone you care about because you fear conflict, rejection, or emotional discomfort. Or maybe it's that personal project you've been postponing for years, the book you wanted to write, the course you wanted to take, or the skill you promised yourself you would finally learn. Each time you delay, the emotional cost increases. The longer you wait, the heavier the idea becomes, as if the weight of unrealized potential slowly accumulates over time. The most surprising part is that we rarely notice this happening in real time. Waiting becomes automatic. We tell ourselves, next month will be better, after the holidays, when things calm down, or when I feel more confident. But have you ever wondered how many months of your life disappeared inside those sentences? How many opportunities quietly passed by while you were preparing yourself for a moment that never actually arrived? And more importantly, how much of your daily behavior is controlled by intention, and how much is simply driven by habit? If you pause and reflect, you may begin to see the hidden cost clearly. Waiting doesn't just delay your progress, it shapes your identity. Every postponed decision reinforces the belief that change is dangerous, that risk is unsafe, and that your dreams can wait indefinitely. And yet, deep down, you know they can't. Time moves whether we are ready or not, and the question becomes, do we move with it, or do we allow it to move without us? So, let me ask you something. Not to pressure you, but to help you look inward with honesty. What part of your life have you been quietly postponing, even though you know it matters? What would happen if you stopped waiting for the perfect moment and allowed yourself to begin, imperfectly, right now? You might discover that the cost of waiting has been much higher than the cost of trying, and that realization alone can be the first step toward reclaiming the year ahead, with intention, courage, and a renewed sense of possibility. The internal dialogue we don't notice. One of the most powerful forces shaping our lives is something we rarely talk about openly. The internal dialogue that runs quietly in the background of our minds. It's the constant stream of thoughts, doubts, explanations, and negotiations that influence how we act, or how we avoid acting. And because this monologue feels so familiar, so intimate, we often accept it as truth without ever examining where it comes from or whether it actually supports our growth. In many ways, the mind becomes a storyteller, and sometimes that storyteller chooses safety over possibility. It creates excuses to protect us, it highlights risks to keep us cautious, and it whispers warnings that feel like wisdom but often come from fear. Think about how subtle this internal dialogue can be. You may tell yourself, "It's not the right moment," or "I'll try when things calm down," or "I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at that." These sentences sound harmless. They even sound reasonable. But beneath them, there's often a layer of self-protection, a desire to avoid failure, criticism, or discomfort. And while the intention behind these thoughts might be to keep you safe, the effect is usually the opposite. They limit your movement, your creativity, your willingness to explore new possibilities. They create a kind of self-sabotage that feels logical because it is disguised as careful thinking. Sometimes the mind is like a room full of whispers, each one claiming to keep us safe. One whisper tells you to wait. Another warns you about judgment. Another insists that you need more time, more skill, more perfection before you begin. If you're not mindful, these whispers blend together into a single narrative that sounds like your own voice. And when that happens, it becomes incredibly hard to recognize that you're not simply responding to reality. You're responding to cognitive patterns that developed years ago and may no longer reflect who you are or who you want to become. These cognitive patterns often form early, shaped by past experiences, cultural expectations, or moments when you felt vulnerable. For example, if you once failed at something important, your mind might create a protective rule. Don't try again unless you're completely ready. If someone criticized you harshly, the mind might decide, it's safer to stay quiet, safer not to take risks. Over time, these patterns become automatic. They operate beneath the surface, guiding your choices without your conscious awareness. They create what psychologists call mental shortcuts. But instead of helping you navigate life efficiently, they sometimes keep you trapped in old emotional territory. The challenge, and the opportunity, is to notice these patterns before they control your behavior. Mindfulness isn't just about breathing slowly or feeling present. It's about paying attention to the stories your mind tells you. When a familiar excuse appears, can you pause long enough to ask yourself, is this thought protecting me, or is it limiting me? When a self-sabotaging idea pops up, something like, you're not good enough, or people will judge you, can you step back and observe it like a cloud passing through the sky, rather than a permanent truth written on stone? When you become aware of your internal dialogue, something powerful happens. You create space between thought and action. And in that space, you gain freedom. You gain the ability to decide whether the whisper is worth listening to or whether it's just an old echo of a past version of yourself. This awareness is not instant, and it's not easy, but it is transformative. It's the key to breaking patterns that have silently shaped your life for years. So consider this for a moment. What is your mind whispering to you these days? Are these whispers encouraging growth or reinforcing fear? Are they helping you move forward or keeping you safely, but unhappily, in the same place? If you listen closely and honestly, you might realize that many of your thoughts are just habits, not truths. And once you see them clearly, you can begin to change the conversation inside your own mind. And that, more than anything, marks the beginning of real transformation, one that will guide you toward a year you won't waste. Momentum versus stagnation. Why action matters more than perfection. One of the biggest misconceptions we carry into adulthood is the belief that we must wait until we feel fully ready before we take action. It's the idea that preparation must come first, confidence second, and action last. But real life rarely works in that order. More often, confidence grows because we took action, not because we waited for a perfect moment. And when we compare momentum with stagnation, the difference becomes clear. Deliberate, imperfect action creates movement, while passive waiting slowly freezes us in place. You don't need a flawless plan to begin. You need a small, imperfect step. Something simple enough that your mind can't talk you out of it, yet meaningful enough to create a shift in your energy. There is a psychological principle behind this called the momentum effect. When you take even a tiny step toward something you want, your brain interprets that step as evidence of intention. It begins to see you as someone who is capable, someone who is moving, someone who is not stuck. This creates resilience, the ability to bounce back, continue, adjust, and keep going even when things get challenging. Action generates more action. Movement generates more movement. And the more you move, the easier it becomes to remain in motion. On the other hand, stagnation has the opposite effect. The longer you wait, the heavier everything feels. The task grows in your mind. the fear increases, and your belief in yourself becomes weaker. Waiting may feel safe, but it slowly drains your internal strength. You can see this dynamic clearly in everyday situations. Think about learning a language, maybe English itself. If you focus on perfection, you may hesitate to speak, afraid of making mistakes. But the learners who grow fastest are the ones who take action despite imperfection. They try sentences that feel uncomfortable, they mispronounce words, they forget grammar, but they keep speaking anyway. And because they take action, they build momentum. Every conversation makes the next one easier. Every mistake becomes information rather than shame. And little by little, they develop fluency, not just in the language, but in confidence itself. The same principle applies to building habits. Let's say you want to start reading more, exercising, meditating, or waking up earlier. If you wait for motivation, you may never start. But if you choose a small action, reading 2 pages, taking a 5-minute walk, meditating for 60 seconds, you break the psychological barrier. You teach your brain that movement is possible. And once the habit exists, even in tiny form, it becomes easier to continue. Perfection isn't required. Consistency is. And consistency begins with a single step. This also shows up in relationships. Sometimes the connection between you and someone you care about becomes strained, not because of a major conflict, but because of small, accumulated silences. You wait for the right moment to text them, to apologize, or to express something important. Meanwhile, the distance grows, but one small act, one message, one honest sentence, one attempt to repair can shift everything. Imperfect action, even if emotionally uncomfortable, often heals more than 1,000 hours of waiting for the perfect emotional state. What these examples reveal is something profoundly simple. Transformation doesn't begin with huge, dramatic decisions. It often begins with tiny acts of courage. The kind of courage that feels almost invisible from the outside, but creates a powerful internal shift. It might be sending an email you've been avoiding, writing the first paragraph of a project, speaking 5 minutes of English with a friend, or taking the first step outside for a short walk. These actions seem small, but they communicate something meaningful to your mind. I am moving. And once your mind believes you are moving, your entire relationship with change begins to evolve. So ask yourself gently, are you waiting for perfection, or are you willing to begin imperfectly? Are you expecting courage to magically appear, or are you ready to create your own courage through action? Momentum doesn't come from thinking, planning, or dreaming. It comes from doing, even a tiny something. And that tiny something can be the spark that prevents another year from slipping quietly away. Revisiting priorities. What actually matters? This year? At some point, we all reach a moment when we need to pause and look closely at the architecture of our lives. Not the surface-level routines or the endless list of tasks we complete every day, but the deeper structure that shapes who we are becoming. And revisiting priorities is part of that process. It requires a kind of honest self-observation, the willingness to ask difficult questions, and the courage to listen to the answers without running away. When you think about the year ahead, it's worth asking yourself not just what you want to accomplish, but what actually matters to you in your values, your relationships, your growth, and your emotional well-being. So many of us live in a constant tension between what is urgent and what is important. Urgent things shout. They demand immediate attention. They create pressure. They make us rush. Emails, deadlines, obligations, routines. They fill the day so completely that we rarely stop long enough to ask whether they deserve so much space. Important things, on the other hand, whisper. They don't force themselves into your schedule. They wait quietly for you to notice them. Your health, your relationships, your personal development, your creative dreams. None of these demand immediate action in the same loud way. But ignoring them for too long slowly creates an emotional emptiness that no amount of urgent tasks can ever fill. And this is exactly how a year slips away, by giving too much power to the urgent and too little attention to the important. To revisit your priorities, start by bringing your attention back to your values, the principles that feel meaningful to you, even if you don't talk about them every day. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to become? What qualities do I admire in others? Which parts of my life feel aligned with the person I hope to be, and which parts feel borrowed from someone else's expectations? Sometimes, without noticing, we adopt goals that aren't ours. We pursue careers our families approve of, lifestyles society praises, or habits we see online, without questioning whether they connect to our true inner compass. And because those goals don't reflect our authentic values, they leave us feeling disconnected, even when we achieve them. Now think about your goals for the year. Not the vague ones you feel obligated to write down, but the goals that genuinely matter to your heart. The ones that make you feel alive, grounded, or purposeful. Maybe it's improving your physical health so you can feel more energy and confidence. Maybe it's deepening a friendship, learning a skill, saving money, building your English fluency, or finding a career path that feels meaningful instead of mechanical. These goals don't have to be dramatic. They simply have to be honest. And honesty is often more transformative than ambition. Responsibilities are part of this reflection, too. Every adult carries responsibilities: family, work, financial commitments, community roles. These are real and deserve respect. But responsibilities should not become excuses to neglect yourself. There is a difference between fulfilling what life requires of you and sacrificing your entire sense of self to meet expectations. Revisiting priorities allows you to redistribute your energy so that responsibility and self-development can coexist, rather than compete. As you think about the year ahead, consider asking yourself a few reflective questions. What would make this year feel meaningful, even if nothing extraordinary happened? Which habits or commitments drain your energy, and which ones nourish it? Are you spending more time reacting to life than consciously designing it? And perhaps the most important question of all, what is one thing you want to prioritize this year that you've been neglecting for too long? These questions are not meant to overwhelm you. They're meant to help you listen to the deeper currents of your life, the ones you often ignore when you're busy surviving. Because when your priorities are unclear, your time is easily taken by things that don't really matter. But when your priorities are intentional, even small choices begin to align with your values. And that alignment, that sense of living from a place of truth rather than habit, is what gives a year its meaning. So take a breath and reflect. What actually matters to you this year? If you can answer that honestly, even in a simple sentence, you're already far closer to a meaningful, intentional year than you were before. Letting go. The power of release and redirection. There comes a point in every meaningful journey when moving forward isn't just about adding new habits, new goals, or new ambitions. Sometimes moving forward requires letting go, gently, thoughtfully, and without judgment. We often carry emotional weight without realizing how heavy it has become. Old dreams that once inspired us but no longer reflect who we are today. Obligations we accepted years ago out of habit or pressure. Identities we constructed to feel safe accepted, or admired, even if they no longer match our current truth. This emotional clutter takes up mental space, drains our energy, and quietly blocks the path to growth. And letting go isn't about quitting, it's about releasing what no longer serves your evolution. Letting go requires something psychologists call psychological flexibility. It's the ability to adjust, adapt, and reshape your inner world when life changes. Instead of clinging tightly to outdated beliefs or old emotional scripts. It's understanding that you don't have to remain the person you were last year, or the year before, or at any moment in the past. Psychological flexibility allows you to rewrite your internal narrative, to say, I can think differently, I can behave differently, and I can choose differently. It's a quiet form of courage, the kind that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but feels deeply liberating from within. One of the things many people need to let go of is perfectionism. It may sound like a positive trait. Who wouldn't want to do things well? But perfectionism often disguises fear. Fear of criticism, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. It creates impossible standards and then punishes you for not meeting them. It slows progress, blocks creativity, and replaces joy with anxiety. Letting go of perfectionism doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means allowing yourself to be human. It means making space for mistakes, learning, and growth. When you release the need to be perfect, you finally begin to move. Another powerful form of letting go is forgiving yourself for past mistakes. Many people carry regrets like invisible stones in their pockets. They replay old failures, old decisions, old moments of shame, sometimes for years. But holding on to guilt doesn't repair the past. It only limits the present. Self-forgiveness is an act of emotional generosity, a way of saying, I did the best I could with the awareness I had at the time. And once you forgive yourself, you reclaim the energy you once used to punish yourself. That energy can finally be redirected into growth, learning, and transformation. Reframing failure is also essential. Instead of seeing failure as evidence of inadequacy, you can choose to see it as information, a message about what works, what doesn't, and what needs to be adjusted. Every failure contains data, insight, and perspective. The more flexible your mindset becomes, the more clearly you can see that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's a part of the process. When you let go of the belief that failure defines you, you become free to try again, and again, and again, without the emotional burden that once held you back. Letting go isn't dramatic. It's gentle, like opening your hand after holding something tightly for too long. It's saying goodbye to versions of yourself that belonged to an earlier season of your life. And when you release these old layers, you create space. Space for new priorities, new resilience, new possibilities, and new forms of self-respect. You stop trying to drag your past into your future, and instead, you allow your future to unfold with clarity. So take a moment to reflect. What in your life feels heavy because it no longer fits who you are becoming? What belief, habit, or identity have you outgrown but haven't yet released? And if you were to loosen your grip on it, even slightly, how much lighter would you feel? Letting go is not losing. It is aligning. It is redirecting your energy toward what matters now, in this season of your life. And in that release, you create the possibility for a year that feels spacious, intentional, and emotionally free. Designing the next 12 months with intention. There is something profoundly empowering about pausing at the edge of a new year and asking yourself not what you should do, but what you want to create. Designing the next 12 months with intention is not about writing a long list of resolutions or building a rigid plan that collapses the moment life becomes unpredictable. Instead, it's about choosing a direction, a sense of inner orientation that guides your choices, your energy, and your growth. When you design with intention, you're not forcing the year to obey your plans. You're inviting yourself to show up with clarity and purpose, even when circumstances shift around you. Intentional planning begins with grounding yourself in reality, not fantasy. It requires honesty. Where are you right now? Emotionally, financially, professionally, spiritually? What patterns keep repeating, and which ones are you finally ready to interrupt? It also requires compassion. You are a human being, not a productivity machine. You can't expect yourself to transform your life overnight, but you can shape it gradually with consistent, thoughtful choices. And this is where the concept of choosing themes becomes so powerful. Instead of setting goals that feel like rigid deadlines, you choose a theme that acts like a compass, something that keeps you aligned even when daily life pulls you in different directions. Think about how it feels to choose a theme like connection. It means you will approach the year with a deeper intention to build relationships, listen actively, communicate openly, and show up for the people who matter. Or imagine choosing discipline. That doesn't mean becoming strict or harsh with yourself. It means developing the ability to follow through on what matters, even when motivation is low. A theme like courage might mean having the strength to take emotional risks, to speak your truth, to apply for the job you've been avoiding, or to finally start the project that scares you but inspires you. These themes are not limitations. They are invitations. They help you focus without becoming trapped by unrealistic expectations. When you design a meaningful year, it also helps to identify one significant shift you want to make, one transformation that feels both important and realistic. Not 10 goals, not 20 habits, not a complete reinvention, just one shift that would genuinely change the texture of your daily life. Maybe it's speaking English for 15 minutes every day. Maybe it's prioritizing your health in a way you've neglected. Maybe it's reconnecting with someone you've drifted from. Maybe it's finally listening to the creative part of you that has been quiet for too long. One shift may sound small, but when pursued intentionally, it can create a ripple effect that reshapes your entire year. As you think about the next 12 months, ask yourself a few reflective questions. What do I want to feel more of? And what do I want to feel less of? What personal qualities do I want to strengthen? Which relationships need more presence? And which ones need healthier boundaries? What kind of experiences do I want to invite into my life? And perhaps the most powerful question is this: if I lived this year with intention rather than habit, how different would my life look by the end of it? Designing your year with intention does not require perfection. It's a gentle, steady practice, a way of keeping your inner compass aligned even when life becomes unpredictable. It's acknowledging that while you cannot control everything that happens around you, you can choose how you show up. And those choices, small, consistent, honest, are what shape a meaningful year. So take a quiet moment to reflect. Choose a theme. Choose a direction. Choose one shift that matters. When you do, you step into the new year not with pressure, but with presence. Not with fear, but with clarity. And not just with plans, but with purpose. A look at your future self. When you think about your future self, it's easy to imagine them as someone distant, a version of you that somehow appears, polished and composed, as if by magic. But the truth is far more empowering. Your future self is simply the accumulation of your present choices. So take a moment wherever you are, and allow your mind to soften. Picture yourself 1 year from today. Not 10 years, not a lifetime away, just 12 months. A short distance, yet long enough to reshape the entire trajectory of your life. Imagine walking into the room where your future self sits. Notice the details, their posture, their energy, the way their presence fills the space. Do they appear lighter, clearer, more grounded? Or do they seem weighed down, carrying the same frustrations and uncertainties you're carrying right now? Let your imagination answer without judgment. Now observe the first version, the you who changed. This future self didn't transform through a dramatic breakthrough or a sudden stroke of luck. They grew because they made small, consistent decisions that built momentum over time. They practiced honesty with themselves. They chose courage on days when comfort felt tempting. They learned to pause instead of panic, to realign instead of abandon their direction. And you can sense something in their eyes, a kind of calm self-trust. It's the look of someone who no longer negotiates with their own potential. This version of you knows what matters and protects it. They speak with clarity, not because life is perfect, but because they finally stopped waiting for perfect conditions to begin. Spend a moment with this image. Let it become tangible. This future self feels possible because they are possible. Now contrast that with the other version, the you who didn't change. Not out of laziness or weakness, but out of habit, out of fear, out of the belief that later would offer a better starting point. Picture them sitting across from you, perhaps a little older, but not much different. The same unresolved conflicts, the same avoided conversations, the same dreams that still glow quietly in the background but remain untouched. This future self isn't a punishment. They are simply the natural outcome of passivity. They represent what happens when a year passes without intention, without realignment, without the courage to disrupt old patterns. This version of you doesn't need criticism, they need compassion. Because they reflect what many of us become when we underestimate the power of small daily actions. And now, bring both versions into focus. See them clearly, side by side. Ask yourself, which one feels more aligned with who I want to be? Which one speaks to the deeper values I hold, the ones I rarely say out loud but feel intensely when I'm alone? This contrast isn't meant to create pressure. It's meant to awaken agency. It's meant to remind you that the future is not an abstract concept floating somewhere beyond your reach. It is shaped quietly and steadily by the way you show up today, tomorrow, and the day after that. Every choice, even the smallest ones, is a vote for the person you become. So lean into this visualization with courage. Know that your future self is not waiting for a miracle. They are waiting for your participation. They are waiting for you to recognize the moments when avoidance disguises itself as logic, or when hesitation dresses up as being realistic. They are waiting for you to move, even if the movement feels imperfect. And in that realization, there is a quiet strength. The strength of understanding that responsibility is not a burden, but a deeply human privilege. You have the ability to influence the direction of your life. You have the power to interrupt stagnation. And you have the right to become the person you know you're capable of being. Take a breath. Let the image of your future self settle into your awareness. Whether the vision feels bright, uncertain, or even a little uncomfortable, treat it as an invitation, a gentle nudge toward intentional, courageous living. The next 12 months will arrive either way. The question is simply, which version of you will be there to receive them? As we come to the end of this episode, take a moment to let everything settle, almost like allowing the surface of a shaken glass of water to become still again. Over the past few minutes, you've traveled through ideas that invite you to move differently, think differently, and show up more intentionally in your own life. We explored how waiting can quietly shape our days, how our inner dialogue influences the choices we make, and how imperfect action builds the momentum that transforms us. We looked at priorities, at letting go, at designing the next 12 months with clarity and intention. And finally, we stepped into the presence of your future self to see what might be possible, or what might remain unchanged depending on the decisions you choose to make. These ideas are not meant to overwhelm you. They're meant to ground you in awareness. They're meant to remind you that life expands the moment you decide to claim responsibility for your direction. Now, before you move on with your day, I invite you to choose one intentional action you can take this week. It doesn't need to be dramatic or impressive. It could be something as simple as making a difficult phone call, opening a new document, and writing the first paragraph of a project, practicing your English speaking for 10 minutes, or finally setting a boundary you've been avoiding. What matters is not the size of the action, but the energy behind it. The energy of refusing to drift. The energy of choosing alignment over inertia. When you make even one small conscious decision, you signal to yourself that change is not something that happens in the distance. It's something you participate in actively. And that simple act of participation builds confidence, self-trust, and forward movement. As you reflect, consider revisiting this episode when you need a reminder of your own capacity. Listening again, especially as a C1 learner, can help you absorb not only the ideas, but the rhythm and nuance of the language. Shadowing sections of the episode can help you strengthen pronunciation, flow, and intonation. You can repeat lines aloud, pause to echo the tone, or imitate the natural speaking style. Every repetition refines both comprehension and expression. Growth doesn't happen through passive exposure. It happens through deliberate practice. So use this episode not just as inspiration, but as a tool, something you can return to whenever you need motivation, clarity, or a moment of grounding. And finally, remember that commitment to personal growth is a quiet, ongoing conversation with yourself. It's not a race, and it's not a performance. It's a steady willingness to adjust, to reflect, to redirect, and to try again when things get messy or uncertain. You don't need to predict the entire year ahead. You only need to stay connected to the next step, the next choice, the next moment of honesty, the next opportunity to act instead of retreat. Growth is built through these micro moments, one after another, slowly shaping a life that feels more intentional and more aligned with who you truly are. So as you step back into your day, carry one final thought with you, a quiet reminder to keep close whenever doubt creeps in or hesitation tries to take over. Your next year begins with your next choice. Make it count.